Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. It is 11 o'clock Central Texas time, and it is Friday once again, Stephen Friday, as we call it. And I'm so thankful that you're here. What an amazing stream we've got for you today. Every time I go back into this content that Steve and I spent time together on stream, I'm just constantly inspired. Why? Because it's true, and the proof's in the pudding, my friends. The proof is in the pudding. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to be talking about a concept that literally was given to Steve, and you're going to hear the story of when this happened. But literally, Jesus told him, He said, decisions are the seeds of reality's harvest. And what an amazing discussion that comes from this today. But first, let's say hello to you, then we'll get into it, and then we'll have some thoughts. But we're with Mike Austell. Mike, you have not only been a big friend of Steve's, but also your own personal health challenges and also your bride's challenges, Peggy. So, good morning, Matt and Steve, and all you wonderful RSU friends. Peggy is resting today and being observed by the doctors. They will decide on when and how to do the surgery. So, for those of you folks don't know, the challenges as it relates to health-related things for Peggy, and so um, Mike's got a great attitude, right? He says right after this, is one thing we know for sure: Jesus has got this. Ray and I have been spending time, every day we talk about this, and it's like, what is prayer? What is this idea of prayer? I want to see it how you see it, Lord. And that's the really cool thing about dealing with health related things. And Steve taught me an amazing lesson in all this is to say, all right, how do you see this, Lord? And how do you see me fitting into this? Is there something I need to do, to say? And so it may be encouraging, whatever it may be. And I think that this perspective that we have is we care about one another. And in that love and concern, we ask Jesus on our own, we say, hey, how do you see this? And one of the beautiful things about this is Steve facilitated so many people in their own journey to come face to face with the living Jesus. And so that's where the action is. It's where it's happening, and we all have access. And so does Peggy, and so does Mike. And we stand with you in that same way. And so I hope it's encouraging to you. But thank you for being here, Mike. I appreciate it. I know that you got a lot going. Ego Foundation, hello. What's up, my friend? Alan Fizame, what is up, man? Thanks for being here. I appreciate you so much. And of course, Carter Hill. If it wasn't for Carter, I wouldn't know Steve. And he's concerned about you as well, Mike. So Carter, thanks for that. Mr. Rock Jockey, or is it M Rock Jockey? I'm not sure. I say Mr. all the time. Eternal Riches. Hex Glenn, what's going on? Terran's back again. Thanks for being. Blessed day all. Casey Hex is here. Hello, RSU fam. Steven, what is up, my friend? Steven Root. One of these days, folks, I'm going to twist Steven Root's arm so much that he actually comes on right side up. One of the longest term friends of Steve Staggs. And actually, Stephen Root was one of the guys who, when Steve Staggs wrote something, he'd be like, hey, Steve, help me out with this and the editing of it and all that stuff. And so they were very, very, very close friends. I got to meet Stephen at the service, and it's awesome. We've all been impacted by Steve, and we're gonna be impacted again by him today. So thank you so much. It's good to be with you all live today. Thanks for being here, and we're gonna get you on screen. Hopefully I can twist your arm. Carter Hill, what's up, Mr. Root? Okay, folks, let's jump into this. So this is from episode number 6. Yeah, episode 6. I put a timestamp in the description if you want to go back to this, where we start. And let's get into it, because this is dynamite stuff, as usual.
Well, yeah, wow, there's a ton in that question. First of all, Jesus is famous in my relationship with him for giving little snippets of statements that, when you hear him at first, you go, oh, that's kind of interesting, until it hits you what it actually means. And one of those, you mentioned the 60s white paper,
Yeah.
last week, and it opens with this little statement at the top: decisions are the seeds of reality's harvest.
We say it again.
Decisions
Okay.
are the seeds of reality's harvest.
Oh wow, what a great example. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Well, that's one of those, statements where I
Yeah.
was just walking down the road one day and he says, "Hey, did you know that decisions are the seeds of reality's harvest?"
Wow. Yeah,
You
that'll
know,
hit you upside the head.
pow. Whoa, what does that mean? Well, a decision, every time you make a decision, that decision is like planting a seed. And that seed will produce your reality. So, what does that say about the importance of decisions? So, if you like the way your life is running, then keep making the same kinds of decisions. If you think there's some holes in the way that you're living or things aren't really going the way they need to go, then hey, stop and think about the basis for which you are making your decisions. Well, that was a profound concept to me. And then you add this thing. So now, how do I make decisions? Well, you're entering the word faithful. Okay. So, what is it to be faithful? Well, in the upside down world, we interpret faithful as being almost loyal.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
True.
a loyalty element to it. Well, that's not what faithful is in the kingdom of God. In the kingdom of God, faithful is being full of faith. It is literally what it says. Okay, so what is faith? We talked about faith, before in a couple of the other streams. That faith is this atomic power, if you will, that is resident in whatever it is that Jesus speaks. So when he speaks to you and he says, "Good and faithful servant," in some of the examples of the parables you were, mentioning earlier
Yep.
in the green room, is that okay? Then a faithful servant is one who is full of his faith, and what he is full of is that atomic power inside of what he says. That servant is full of what Jesus is saying to him.
Yeah.
And so then when he speaks in the form of his decisions, then the atomic power, if you will, of faith is in that decision that then produces the outcome of what Jesus is having you speak or decide. OMG, you just
Yeah.
described,
Yeah.
Lord, how you created.
Yeah.
You spoke. What was resident in your speaking was the Father's faith. That, by the way, is if it were the size of a grain of a mustard seed, you could command the mountain to be moved, picked up and moved from here to there, and it would obey you. Whoa.
Yeah.
So the Father spoke to you. You spoke then into the whatever it was that was there. The result of that was the creation that we call the creation, documented in Genesis 1 through 1 and 2. And oh my goodness, you do the same thing to me. When
Wow.
you speak to me, you send that same atomic power so that when I speak and decide, what is happening out of that choice and decision is to create the next thing that Jesus wants to create.
Wow.
And that becomes the harvest of our life. Whoa.
Wow. We didn't plan that, Steve. Maybe you did. I didn't. Oh my gosh, that is so good. Well, okay, so let me say it back to you because this is really profound. What's interesting is I often hear people talk who are not talking in the vernacular of the church, right? These are people created by God, right? They're living, breathing people. And they'll talk about manifestation, right? You hear a lot of people, especially in crypto, you hear this a lot. But what's interesting about it is I often talk about how, science is like this ladder and, reality, which I would say is the creation, which is in our context, it's literally everything, right? God made it
What is?
all. What is? Good point. And it basically they're leading to the same place. And I don't mean leading to the same place from a churchy perspective. I mean they're I guess the term is part and parcel of the same thing, which you're coming to it and recognizing a portion of creation and how it works, but from an interesting perspective. In some cases, there's a lie associated with those things, but we're identifying things that are real. So, for example, I think a lot of people that are in the kind of new agey movement would say, "Yeah, you've got all the power. Um, you are the divine, and you are, speaking things into existence. You're manifesting those things. So if you want more money, think about more money. And if you're really specific and you write it down and you talk about it a bunch of times, well, what I find odd about this is, in some respects, it's not that you're seeing it differently. You're just recognizing you may not have the understanding of where that true power resides because you're assuming that that is all resident just in you. But I almost feel like over these 5 weeks of discussion, I feel like there's a lot of stories that Jesus told that give us an indication how if we're not connected to the source. And I know that in the first episode you talked about the roots and what the roots draw.
Yeah.
And the question is, what are your roots drawing from? And this idea that, okay, I have, um, you even said this before. You said you've kind of forgotten who you are. Well, I almost feel like we get glimpses of it, and we try to put labels on it to say, well, yeah, I'm going to manifest this stuff. Well, a lot of times, what we're manifesting is, you know, the creation, not the creator.
Yeah.
We're not seeking to understand the source. We're trying to magically appear the creation. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah. 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 The miracle concept of instantaneous reconfiguration of something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is so interesting. So I put up that banner because I didn't want to miss it myself, right? I wanted to make sure it was in there. Is this correct? Decisions are the seeds of reality's harvest.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
So to break that down, then, so every choice that we make, and a lot of times, Steve, I would say choices don't seem like they're super consequential, right?
No.
We've talked about this before, like, hey, what pair of shoes am I going to put on? What jacket today? Am I going to go to this place for lunch? And what am I going to, what am I going to do? And then you think about what you're saying is you may not see this decision that you're making having a tremendous impact in the future, but as you add these things together, and I think I saw this with my dad, is that, when he came out of surgery, he said, don't smoke. He just gotten his lung cut out basically. And he's like, don't smoke. And I'm like, well, that's a little late for that one, right? But he's basically saying, I made these decisions and I repeated these decisions over time and it led to this spot. And I know that's just kind of a weird example of it. But one of the things it says in the word is it talks about holding each thought captive. Well, that
Yes.
really is interesting. Like if you were to listen to Jesus and say, all right, I'm not going to do anything unless you tell me to do it, and you know that it has that atomic energy. Well, what if we could continue making those decisions, Steve? It builds up, it seems like, right? There's an aggregation of that which has a longer term blessing. And I think in the short term, it seems like when we make those decisions that are according to what he's speaking, there's like peace around it. Everyone else is benefiting from it. There's like a resonance to it versus when I'm going my own way and making my own decisions. It's like I may win, but everyone else doesn't.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to be answering your question, and so bring me back to it if I'm missing
Yeah.
your question is that uh, we don't think that much about the importance of our decisions because they become routine to us.
Yeah.
And yet Jesus asks this or makes this really controversial statement that preachers, teachers, and learned people inside the church have not been able to get a handle on, which is consequently you will be judged for every idle word that you speak.
Yeah.
Well, what in the world is he talking about? Are you making me paranoid about everything that comes out of my mouth?
Yeah.
How do I know what's idle and what's not idle? What the heck do you mean by that?
Right.
Which we don't ask.
Right. But you can't.
We're taught to go in there and try to figure out, through study and something else what Jesus is recorded to have said, instead of just stepping back and saying, whoa, dude, what did you mean by that? That seems pretty heavy-handed to me. Well, what is wrapped up inside that is an understanding of the nature of decisions. You were talking about the new agey thing just a minute ago. Well, okay, you can speak whatever you want to speak. And yes, you will have some effect in creating something out of your decisions. The question is, one, who is the source of that speaking? Two, whose interests does it serve? And three, and most importantly, is it eternal or is it temporal? And here's the point. Whatever is temporal, whatever will pass away is idle. Doesn't mean it didn't occupy some period of time on the planet. It doesn't mean that it didn't have some impact on the planet. It just means that it passed away.
Yeah.
Well, in the context of eternity, that's as if it never existed.
Right.
I mean, whoa. So Jesus says, hey, heaven and earth will pass away. Whoa, what does that mean? But my word will never pass away. Whoa. So, Steve, what is it that you want to be held accountable for when this whole thing is wrapped up? Do you want to be accountable for the stuff that passes away, or do you want to be accountable for the stuff that is eternal, that lasts forever? Where is your interest, Steve? What do you want to do? You're free to choose. You can do whatever you want to do.
Wow.
But what is it that you would like to have, plant your flag in?
Mhm.
Well, Jesus, I think the stuff that actually means something. And okay, if that's what you want to do, then listen to me, learn to listen to me, learn how to make decisions with me. And when you do, I will fill you with my faith. And when you speak and decide, then we will create together what our Father has intended from the beginning. Steve, is that something you're interested in? Well, Lord, okay, let's do that.
This is the ultimate Jesus dropping the mic. He's like dropping the mic. He's like, "That's it, folks." And how one of the things we not joke about, what we laugh about and we enjoy so much is the simplicity
Yeah.
of this. It's like once you recognize that things are upside down, and once they're right side up, they're actually really, really simple concepts. What's so striking to me is the fact that this is new to me.
Hmm.
And that's
Yeah.
the shocking thing, right?
Yes.
And so anyone that's listening to this is the shocking thing is I've gotten a sense of this. I jokingly said in our first episode that, it's one thing to smell a good brisket and it's another thing to eat a good brisket.
Yeah, right on.
And I almost feel like I've smelled what he's cooking and it smells so good, right? I don't know that I've tasted. At times, maybe he's
Yeah.
broken off a piece for me. But there's something different here, which is this idea of I really truly believe, Steve, that there's so many people and that the devil's work is essentially the ultimate middleman, wanting to get in between us listening to his voice.
Yeah.
And it really feels like, hold on, if life and peace and all of this fruit is from basically, there's a weird, and maybe you can speak to this. The only term I know in English that makes any sense is this kind of idea of letting go or surrendering to his authority, which actually increases your authority. But you realize that I'm more of a pass through of him than I am just a separate, thing. And so as I get connected and I draw from this, there's almost joy. It's like I think about my son. He just turned 12. And you know how this is. You know that a 12-year-old is not a 25-year-old.
Yeah.
But when he makes some progress, or he's getting funnier by the day, and so his humor is becoming more adult like, and it's hilarious. And I'm like, I kind of look at him like, wow, you're actually getting some kind of complex, jokes. Like his jokes before were really bad. I'm like, that's pretty good. And I'm proud of him, but I'm proud of him in context. Like it's okay. I don't expect him to be 25 or 55. I don't
Yeah.
expect him to know everything, but I take joy in the growth. Do you believe? I believe it. I'm sure you do. That God takes joy in our progress.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, that's one of the hard things. At least it was for me. As Jesus was transitioning me from the from the religious world that I was a part of into his kingdom, and the way that is functioning and how it operates and the whole attitude. Inside the religious world, it is all based on law, because the intention of it is to subjugate God's man to something.
Right.
It has to be subjugated to something, thing, when in reality he was always designed to be a partner with God. Now, from a relational and positional, what I refer to as standing, from a position of standing, those are light years apart. Are standing to law, which is subject, in other words, subservient to it, as opposed to, in contrast to, are standing with Jesus as a partner.
Hmm.
Those are light years apart. And so what happens is that when you discover the difference between the two, is that the law model is there for the purpose of pass fail.
Right.
The only thing is, you never really know what the law means until you come under somebody else's opinion about it, and then you're subject to not the law itself, but their opinion about that law.
Yeah, judgment.
See? Whereas the model inside the kingdom is one rooted in attitude. So in the model of law, it's pass fail. You either screw up or you get it right. In the model of the kingdom, it's the attitude. I want to learn how to live with you, Jesus. Well, okay, let's do that. Oh, you screwed up? Oh, no worries. Let me show you how let me make you better out of that screw up. Let
Mhm.
me show you how it actually worked. Let me unpack for you what was happening behind the scenes that you couldn't see, so that next time you can see. an entirely different model. They're not even in the same universe. They're so totally different. So yeah, the Father has a great time watching us even in our failures, because guess what comes out of our failure? A greater learning and understanding of who he is, why he is, and how things work with him.
Yeah.
Well,
Wow.
that I like that model.
I do too. Well, and it's also reflected in the story you told. Your papa, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I think about, I don't have grandkids. I'm looking forward to that. I really am. And
you'll love it.
I just imagine seeing these little ones, and they don't know all this stuff, right?
No,
They don't know what papa's been involved in, and all this stuff, but you enjoy them, and you take joy in their development, and you know, you give to them, but they also are a production of the joy. And one of the things I see with my kids, and I'm sure with grandkids, this is probably even more concentrated, is almost this purity of love, because you get to see them on occasion, right? Like, you don't see all of the stuff, but you get to enjoy. It's almost like tasting the fruit of these decisions that have created this reality for you. And I think of a lot of people that watch this, and I certainly find this to be the case, is, what are we called to? And to think that if I had a choice, and I think about my dad a lot, he made choices, and you kind of a lot of times have to live with the ramifications of choices. I mean, you cut your arm off, you're not going to have an arm for the rest of life. But there are some consequences to the decisions we make, but also I almost feel like we need to testify to the hope that is in daisy chaining good decisions
yeah,
together.
yes,
It's like spurring you on to love and good deeds. And I think in crypto, what I'm trying to do with all this, and what I'm just so thankful for, is the fact that, a good encouraging word to people, of providing them with hope that there is a future that's better. Partly we're speaking it into existence. And then on the other hand, we're also, um, we're providing people with hope and encouragement. And I don't know, it seems like, if you had a choice, would you be a creator or a critic? It
yeah,
seems pretty obvious to me that you'd be a creator.
yeah,
And to think about those words that come out of your mouth and what they create.
yeah,
I think about, what I was told all my life, and even hate to say this because it's embarrassing for my family. You cannot be trusted.
yeah,
I can't tell you how many times I heard that. And I'm like, no, I can be trusted. And I'm like, well, does that define who you are? And I think about a lot of people who have had parents, and been in relationships or situations where they've been told a story, and they're like, well, I guess that's who I am. The amazing thing about what you're talking about is that everything in the scripture is about Jesus giving you a new name, and says all of that stuff, right? All of that carnage and all of those stories, I'm going to redefine who you are in me.
yes,
How and that is I think that's the thing, people that are cursory, kind of coming to Jesus, right? And going, well, I've heard about this Jesus guy, and yeah, I know they changed the calendar, but is he really who he says he is? And what I love about everything that we've done here in these last 5 weeks is, these things pop out in my mind of the things you said. Like, one of those is, yeah, I went down front and the pastor said to me, hey, I'd like to introduce you to Jesus. And I'm like, that's so perfect. Do you realize that one statement by him, what it created for you, Steve, in your life?
yeah.
And he spoke that into you, and you're like, I took him seriously. He was going to introduce me to this guy.
I'm ready.
And then here you are. Look at your whole life story of your journey with Jesus, is getting to know him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going to tell you, folks, there is a real person to get to know.
Yeah,
And there is real power, and there's real speaking. And it's one of these things where I love the subtlety of it, because in a way, if it was loud, we wouldn't cherish it. And then there's so many stories. It, like, makes the scriptures become technicolor. A man finds a treasure in a field. Well, yeah, he's like, I found a treasure. No one else found this treasure. I found this treasure. I'm going to go buy the entire field.
yeah,
So I have that treasure. Well, what is that treasure? That is Jesus. That's what we're testifying to. That's what we're saying, is
yeah,
that, guys, there's a treasure here. Well, what is a treasure? It has value. What I'm saying is, I'm not trying you to join my church or join my religion or do this stuff. I'm saying, and that's why I often talk about it, I found out where the food is. I found the treasure.
yeah,
And the treasure has value, but it's not the kind of value you think.
yeah.
It's the value you actually need.
Yes, yes, yes.
So
Well, it's, to your very point, Matt, words, decision, things that we're talking about. Uh, and this has become very, in our relationship, and now folks are getting a chance to be exposed to that, through uh, our broadcast here of our typical telephone conversation, is over time you become increasingly aware, because it becomes obvious, of how upside down we are in our thinking.
Yeah.
So you just said a few minutes ago, by way of example, I love it how Jesus then comes in and says, I'm going to redefine you. No, we have already been redefined. He's stripping away the redefinition and bringing us into our original definition of who we are in him that he established and created before time began. We are the redefinition when we operate in the upside down world.
Okay,
That's
so
the
that
redefinition.
that's the corrosion, that's the gunk, that's the stuff that he has to remove.
Yes, that's the redefinition.
So
The
so
way
but the
you describe it, is you're just not an accident. You're
yeah,
just not come out of the ooze. You're not just an animal. You're right.
right.
That's the redefinition. And Jesus says, no, I'm going to strip away the redefinition. And when I strip away the redefinition, I'm going to strip away everything that supports and establishes in you an attitude that says, yes, I'm just ooze.
Yeah.
10 million years down the road.
Yeah.
No, you're not ooze 10 million years down the road. That's the redefinition.
Yeah.
We're going to strip that away. It's kind of like we were talking about, the citizens, deserving, a vote. No, citizens don't deserve votes.
Yep. They demand it.
Subjects deserve votes. Citizens demand votes. Why? Because they're superior.
Well, okay, so let me ask you this question. There's a now we go back to a previous discussion we had, and you even reflected this within the scriptures is then there is a convention for the effect that God uses of renaming people, right? And we see this. So I want to hold both things up in kind of tension to say you were created perfectly. You were created in who you are. You may just be coming to know who I made you to be, right?
Yes.
You've forgotten who you are, right?
Yes.
But in some cases, even Jesus himself, and in many cases, they use the convention of renaming to illustrate that point.
Yes.
Fair? Is that fair?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's
Abram to Abraham, Sarai to Sarah, Jacob to Israel, Jehovah
all
to
to
Jacob.
Paul.
Yeah. Saul to Paul. Yes. A lot of examples like that. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
awesome. Let's say hello to some folks here, and then I've got something. Wow. Once again, I really miss Steve a lot. I don't know about you, but I really do. When I listen to that, I remember the first time I met him, there was something about his voice, just the very nature of his voice. When I shook his hand and I heard the intonation, and talk about something that's so comforting. And it's just, I go back to that spot. I watch this with you guys, and I'm just like, wow. And these like amazing, like, you know, in the scriptures, it talks about how, Jesus even said, um, the Sabbath was made for man, right? What is the Sabbath but a reminder? All these festivals, all these things that were there, it's like to constantly remind you. And then, I was really kind of disgusted with myself because I was scrolling through YouTube shorts. And I don't know if you've ever done that, kind of find yourself like, hey, I've been doing this for like 40 minutes. You may not be as stupid as I am, but it's like, this has no value. And like I'm wasting, like almost like it's idle time. And I feel like real convicted by that. And it's like, and it makes you feel like disconnected. And, we think of, just the nature of the day. The sun rises and sunsets, and you're unconscious for 7 or 8 hours maybe. And this cycle, mercies renewing in the morning, those kind of things, this opportunity to do it again. And this idea of being connected to the source is a big hearing this again. We constantly have to remind ourselves because there's so much noise. There's so much noise in the system. But here's some things I wanted to talk about because I had, every time I watch this stuff and I prepare for these streams on Friday, and I have like bigger ahas than I had the first time. But this theme of decisions are the seeds of reality's harvest. What is a seed? And even Steve mentioned the mustard seed, right? The smallest of seeds. And that was equated to faith that could move mountains. So to have Steve hear from Jesus that decisions are the seeds of reality's harvest, it totally makes sense to me that you know, we have to hold these thoughts captive because the concept of with Jesus is the very framework with how it was created. And it's funny, we have this choice to make. I live on a creek and we've got this really awesome porch. And my wife jokes that we've got like this nature preserve, and there's just tons of deer and all kinds of cool birds and squirrels and all these things. And then of course we got two dogs and two cats and kids, and it's like a farm, feels like it. But we will feed the deer and they'll come up really close. They're very, very tame. And you look out at God's creation, and these animals don't have the choice. They don't have the knowledge of good and evil. And there's an obvious difference between us and them. But the provision and the withness, if that is even a term, the withness of these animals with creation. They're not worried, right? They're not fretting. They're not like, oh no. And it's like, no, this provision in this system. And to think they have really almost no choice but to do it with. And then I think about my dogs every morning. I get up and get my coffee, and the dogs are like, they want to go out. And they rely on me. They're kind of partnering with me to be able to somewhat survive. And it's just really interesting to think that all of the things that we've done to destroy this place and to destroy one another, I go back to Cain and Abel, this idea of like we kill and covet because we don't get what we want. And you think about it, what ultimately is sin but going our own way? And to think that what Steve said was every word that comes out of the mouth of God, that's what we live upon. And here's Jesus saying that to Satan when he comes out of the wilderness, right? He's like, turn these stones into bread. And he's like, no, no, man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God. And so you see this model in Jesus when he's here, basically saying, listen, I only do what this guy, my boss tells me. And he's showing us the way. And I would say, this whole point of doing these things on Friday and all the stuff with Steve is just this amazing understanding that the systems and belief systems that have been created, whatever religious group, whatever denomination, and all those kind of things, is a framework of an understanding that it becomes like law. And you have to conform to that and be subject to it. And, he made a really good point. Like, you either got it right or you don't got it right. But in this scenario of saying, "Oh no, I'm going to walk with him," and my grandma said, the old hymn, "I walk with him and I talk with him." Well, what comes with that is that you then understand what actually faith is, because it's funny that faith is like it says faith is a substance, and if you think about it that way, right, it's a substance, and I think it's so great with what Steve said. That if what Jesus says out of his mouth is that atomic power, which I love that terminology, is that what he says is what becomes, right? Spoke things into existence, right? Jesus, all things were made for him and by him. And you think about the creation of let there be light, and there was light. Spoken, right? It was spoken into existence. And everything that's been documented in the word of God, right? It's the scriptures, right? In the Bible is an account of something that he said or did. And we've basically gone, that's all historical Jesus stuff, and that's just a book, and we have to come under the authority of this book. Well, hold on. This book is just an account of all these things that he said and did. Well, is he alive or is he dead? And when you kind of break it down to that simplicity, you go, well, no, he's alive. Well, then he speaks. And there's so many examples of that, right? Peter, James, and John go up the Mount of Transfiguration. They're like, whoa, Jesus is transfigured. He's talking with Moses and Elijah. They're conferring. That means Moses and Elijah are alive, number one. And number two, they're like, oh, should we build you equal like tents or tabernacles or whatever? And a voice from the sky says, this is my son. Listen to him. Why in the world do we say that? Listen to him. Because when we listen to Jesus, and this is one of, I think, the biggest challenges for me, because when I started really thinking about this, I'm like, I don't hear audibly from Jesus. And of course, Steve shared with me, no, 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 no. Like, are you interested in him teaching you how to hear? And I'm like, well, he's like, I've been doing this for 40 years, dude. Like, well, I haven't been doing it that long. And it's amazing. There's no incomplete, you know, equations with Jesus. If he says it, you can take it to the bank. The whole thing is, are you interested in hearing what he has to say about the situation? So let's go back to the very beginning of this stream, and Mike Ostel is sharing about Peggy, right, his wife, and Peggy is she's in the hospital, right, getting ready for surgery. They're trying to know, and what are we saying about that? In the past, I think I would say something very cursory, that the what do church people say to each other? Hey, I'll pray for you, brother. And it sounds good. But then I think about this. You know what I'm going to do for you, Mike? I'm going to inquire of Jesus how he sees this. And I'm going to encourage you to do the same thing. Because he says, consider it pure joy, brothers, when facing troubles of many kinds. Well, I would consider this trouble of many kinds. I would consider your wife in surgery and all these kind of things a challenge. How do I consider it pure joy unless you have a perspective that I ain't got? And I think that I would like to know what that is. And if I can exchange wishes with you and go, hey, how do you see this? And I can come into an understanding of how you see it, because you're interested in my every inquiry, then what's the byproduct of that? Rest, have peace. Wow. Wow. So that's why Mike said, hey, I know Jesus has got this. I'm coming late to the party, right? Like, do I really believe that he's got it? But this idea that we would partner and we would walk with him is so incredible that that's possible. And I think that one of the biggest challenges that so many people have in life is, one, they don't know what their purpose is. And obviously it's not just singular, but two, they just feel so alone. That's why when you meet people who actually care for you, you're like, well, hold on, are you going to leave me? Are you going to destroy me? And it's this idea of, why does love cover a multitude of sins? Well, because it's love is like big time caring, thoughtfulness, and consideration. And you think about, on earth as it is in heaven, right? This idea of the kingdom of God is going to be one in which you are fully known and you fully rest with him. It's amazing. It's amazing. But that's the vision, that with him, we can literally daisy chain these decisions together. And what we will do is reap a harvest of eternal things, right? Of not temporal things. And I thought it was so great that he's saying the difference between this is, the idle things are the things that I want, right? I'm going to be this guy and make all this money, and then I'm going to give it to the university and put my name on the building. And then it crumbles to the ground, right? What are the temporal things and what are the eternal things? And of course, you spend any time with Jesus and he shows you what really matters. And there's this like core undergirding of love that's in that. That's amazing, right? Grace. It's amazing. It's amazing. But man, it's just crazy. He also said, and I think this is another thing I want to really point out, we've been defined. And he was referencing, I always talk, I said, hey, you're not an accident. You didn't just crawl out of the ooze and you became a newt, and then like a lizard, and then, you became a baboon or a chimpanzee, and then voila, you are you, and you are mowing the lawn. It's not this accidental thing. Well, what is that? We've been defined by those around us, right? That are not the creator of the universe. And so we have essentially put on this faulty armor. The story of Saul fighting Goliath. He sees this. He's like, I got this guy. And they're trying to put on him Saul's armor, which obviously doesn't fit. He's like, get this off of me. These things have been placed upon us to define who we are. And then we believe it. We're like, yeah, I guess I'm that kind of guy. And what he's saying is that as you come to Jesus and literally ask him, "Hey, how do you see this? And how do you see this situation? And how do you see me? And what do you have for this? What's the purpose here? What's the plan? How should I see this thing? This is really difficult." And he starts telling you, "Well, this is who I made you to be." And he talks about this onion. It just like it peels back all of these things that are. And what I think is amazing is as these things fall away, you just see Jesus standing alone in the midst of this, and you end up at a person versus a belief system or a book or anything like that. Those things are ancillary to the core of, hold on, the creator of the universe chose for you to be here at 11:41 Central Standard Time. Like, what would it look like if we actually journeyed with him? And I'm going to tell you that my experience has been peace that transcends all understanding, what most people would consider miraculous. And Ray and I were talking the other day about you have not because you ask not. Well, we have a responsibility and a role in all this, but you know, I clearly don't have the right perspective all the time. So, what would it look like if I wasn't just scrolling on my phone, but I was holding each thought captive to him and I was asking him, "Hey, man, how do you see this? What do you got next?" Because there's a way that seems right to a man, and in the end, it leads to death. Right? My dad's chain smoking Pall Malls, and next thing you know, he's getting his lung cut out. He's like, "Don't smoke, man." Decisions are the seeds of reality's harvest. What kind of harvest do we want to have? One of eternal riches. And Steve modeled that. I'm just so thankful. I'm just so thankful. Thanks, Carter, for bringing him to the Texan meetup, man. It's transformative. But what is that? That's really ultimately what Steve talked about. That's the transfer of the man. What does it look like if all of the tools and everything that we have, from AI to internet to whatever it is, these tools are neutral, and that we animate tools in a certain nature and character? Well, what if we were to animate those tools, including our own bodies, tools, resources, in God's nature and character? Well, how do we know what it is? Well, you can test and approve. You can ask him. You're renewing your mind by literally speaking with him. And that's where we come back to this whole premise of this whole thing. And that is Jesus is alive and he speaks. That's the whole premise. We've been convinced by many people that Jesus was a historical figure, if you even believe that. And well, but if you actually look at this, no, everything was created for him and by him. He was there from the beginning, and he chose you from the beginning. Think about this for a second. We read about people like Methuselah lived a long time, and Abraham, and we look at people like Noah. Noah lived what it says in the Bible, 365 years, which I think is interesting. But some of these people live in almost 1,000 years. And then, of course, you get into the Sumerian kings list, and they're like 26,000 years of a reign. And I kind of challenge with the idea that, well, we get maybe 120. My dad died at 72, 73, and Steve at 72. This is short. Why is it so short? And I think a big part of this, it feels a lot like boot camp. Are you going to understand who the nature and character of your father? You have a choice to make. You can go your way. He's going to honor that choice. You can choose not to. But it's really interesting to think that, well, kind of the animals don't have a choice but to kind of live dependent upon the very creation and framework. And it's like we're the ones that have the ability to buck the system. And that's really at the core of it. We have the knowledge of good and evil. The question is, which way you going to go? You going to go your own way? Or are you going to do this with the author and perfecter and creator of it all? And he's available. And I think the hard part about it is I was sitting with one of our friends in the chat here, and he asked a question of me that I asked to Steve. He's like, how do you know it's Jesus that's talking to you? I had a hard time with that because I was like, oh, I don't know. What if I'm listening to the wrong guy? And Steve said to me, he goes, what's your intent, Matt? I was like, he's like, is your intent to listen to Satan? I was like, no. It's like, okay, well, there's a nature and character to the one who speaks, and you have to discern that, right? And it's like, ask him, and he'll teach you how to hear him. But but realize that he speaks in so many more ways than just an audible voice. And that's the thing that I found that's been absolutely incredible is that it's subtle, but it's also so profound, and it requires interest. And in that is a bit of discipline, right? I feel like I have the ability to be a little bit more interested if I'm not distracted by other stuff. And so there's an element of discipline of this. And I see that in Steve. One of Steve's great friends said that when they would stay over at the house, Steve get up, grab his coffee, and you'd see him over there. And you know what he would say? He told me, he's like, your language, Matt, is going to change from, hey, Jesus, what do you want me to do? To, hey, Jesus, what are we doing today? And I think that's so cool, right? And that's the approach that, just saying, hey, what are we doing? Decisions are the seeds of reality's harvest. So the question is this: what are the decisions that we're making? And I think what's so cool about this is, those decisions, right? And he's going to help you too. That's the other cool thing about this is, how do I discern what's right and wrong? Am I alone in all this? No, you're not. I say this all the time, but Steve said, why didn't the ark fly? And I just love that. Why didn't the ark fly? Why did it have to have poles? And can you imagine how heavy that box was? It was made out of wood, and then it was coated in gold. And you think about it, and it had like the 10 commandments that were made out of stone, manna, all the stuff. And he's like, why didn't it fly? Because the intent was the glory of the Lord. They would walk with God, right? Literally with him. And that was the intent. That's the story. That's the picture of it all. And it's really interesting to me, like terms that Jesus said, like the kingdom of heaven is near. We think of that in a timeline of near, but what if it's in a physical sense of near, right? And that's where I get to this fact that we're face to face with the creator of all things, who is eagerly anticipating our next inquiry. Do you see him as that close? Or do you see him as some faraway, forgotten, you're on your own and alone? And I would say, just from my own experience, and I haven't been doing it as long as Steve, he's right here with us. Right here with us. Folks, I'm so thankful for you. I'm so thankful for Steve. I miss him so much, but I'm so thankful that we've recorded this stuff, because it's like the gift that keeps on giving. Why? Because Jesus is alive and he speaks, and these things are true. And the truth is probable. You can continue to ask it questions. And so one of the great things that Steve taught me was, you can know when you've reached a point where you've got issues. If you're not allowed to ask questions, if you're not allowed, right? And that's very, very common. Look in our culture right now. There's certain things you can't talk about. That doesn't sound like God's creation. That doesn't sound like Jesus, right? And I think we think that he's only concerned about big stuff. No, you can ask him anything. Like you can approach him with anything, absolutely anything. And the core of that is just interest in knowing, hey, how do you see this? But want to talk about having a straight path? That's what I want to have. I want to have a straight path. It's a discipline, and it's amazing the byproducts of it, because what I find is, people will say things like, God makes a way where there is no way. Well, yeah, to you, the way you see it, but it's really his way. His way is strategic. It's direct. It's a straight path. And I've just been, going in circles or bumping against the sides of the walls. It's like, all right, thank you that you didn't, make this super difficult. But you said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. This idea that we would walk with you in this life, and that's where actually peace and joy and purpose comes from. Well, then that's how you can actually love other people. I think about people who go to, they go to mostly secular psychology. And it's really interesting because, you think, oh, I'm going to go get my head shrunk by one of these shrinks, right? I'm going to get, some perspective. I think what's amazing is we have access to this one, the counselor, right? We have access. And it's interesting. Who knows us better, right? Does your shrink know you better than Jesus himself? But more than importantly, we're kind of renting the friendships that we ought to have. Do you have somebody in your life that you can tell them anything and they don't judge you? They help you unpack it. I mean, what we long for. That's why community is so important. And I think about, what we consider to be the modern church is not really the definition of the ecclesia, those that actually chased after him and said, "Hey, what'd you mean by this?" That's all we're doing. You can do that from where you're sitting. "Hey, what'd you mean by this?" Whether it's something you read or don't understand, or if it's about a decision or whatever you're doing, it's like, "Hey, let's do this together. What do you got?" And I think that that's the thing that you find. You're like, "Hold on a second. Wow, we do this together. There's amazing results." Well, those things are eternal. But the things that I go my own way and I'm like, "I'm gonna go do this thing." Well, there's so many stories about that. Like you prayed in the street aloud. Yeah, you received your reward in full. You used many words in prayer. Yep, you received your reward in full. It's like, no, store up your treasures in heaven. What are these eternal riches? And it's like, okay, well, I'm interested in knowing what the next step is, and let's do this together. So, what are we doing today? Ha! I don't got it all figured out. I'll tell you that right now. But I do know that um, He's the source, and there's truth in that, and that you know all of these things that you've seen, God winking at you and showing you that these things are true. I've written these things down in the past, of course, recording these things on the internet. We're not writing a New Testament of Scripture, but we are testifying to the goodness of a speaking and living Jesus. And that just shows you what the value and purpose is of the Scriptures. People thought this was so important of what Jesus said and did that they wanted to tell you about it. We don't worship a book. We worship a living creator of all things. Thanks for joining the Pulse today. My name is Matt. It is Stephen Friday. Have a great weekend. And let's continue to seek him in what the next step is and what he wants to do together. Because there's a lot of people suffering in this world. A lot of people are challenged with a lot of things. And it's like, all right, I'm going to assume that there's strategic purpose in all of it. And all right, I'm going to understand how you see it. And then I'm going to act the way in which you direct me to act. It's kind of like we got cut in on the deal, man. The secret to life is right in front of us. Thanks for joining us. Encourage you to share with others, but also be a part of this. If you'd like to have conversations in the meantime, kind of in between Fridays, we have a Telegram group, and it's in the description. And there's just a group of people that are like, "Hey, let's talk about this stuff, or let's just share life together." It's called Right Side Up, and it is a Telegram group, and you can join by clicking the link in the description. Have a fantastic weekend, and don't mess with Texas, right? That's not good. Take care, everybody. Bye.